Alzheimer's unit at the nursing home and just recently passed away. Her service will be today at 2 o'clock. She was a member of our church. It's kind of unfortunate that Friday afternoon, when we would have gone to get flowers from our church, the florist here would not fill the orders. One of them said they already had too many and they weren't going to do any more, and the other one couldn't, so our church is not going to be sending flowers. We'll find out if there's some special memorial offering that the family had requested and see what we might do there. But anyway, that's 2 o'clock today. Now, we're going to serve the family lunch right after church. They're supposed to all be here. You'll probably be a parking lot full of people when you get out that are coming over for lunch, the family. It's a pretty good-sized family. And our ladies, thank you, ladies, for all your hard work. You got a double whammy almost this week to help prepare food and serve. Some have asked some of the members who are going to be helping services. They got some families with them. Well, I'm just going to tell you this. There should be sufficient for everybody, but let's let the family go first, and when they're all through the line, then any of us that are here will go join them, okay? It'd be perfectly all right to do that. So if you want to join them afterwards. Lucretia? All right, one for Doris and one for... All right. Yeah, now the family that's going to have the service today, Miss Doris Brooks had a daughter named Shirley. Shirley's married to Chris. Chris's father is going to be buried tomorrow. So that family has a mother on one side and a father on the other side, back-to-back services. And so Ms. Brooks is going to be this afternoon, 2 o'clock. Dinner served here for her. Tomorrow, Jerry was not a member of our church. His wife has passed away 3 or 4 years ago. Her name was Ann. She was of the Ms. Roach family. This gets technical, okay? This gets technical. These two families intertwine. Jerry Fight is Penny's uncle. So I'm not going to, we're going to quit right there, okay? Anyway, these two families are together, and so they have asked permission to use the fellowship building, but didn't obligate us to bring the food for that. But I think we got some ladies that are going to come and help out with help them serving that for tomorrow nonetheless. So y'all have just kind of stepped up here at the last minute in an emergency situation and been very cooperative and no complaints to help out folk who need it. So I want to thank you a whole lot for y'all's willingness to do that. And then tomorrow at 10 o'clock at Wolf City, we'll have the service for Jerry Fight. And afterwards, they will come back by the church, and that family will use our fellowship building for their dinner. And then sometime later in the week, one of our former members, Liz Clinton, passed away in the wee hours of this morning. I got a phone call at 2:14 that she had just passed away, and that Liz was really well thought of. Liz loved kids. She headed up our youth program and vacation Bible schools and everything else. She just was one of those go-getters, and she'd just jump in there and things were done, and people looked to her. And so she was a real blessing. She's a real blessing to the church over in McKinney. And so it's a great loss for them today. Brother Kevin is the pastor, and that's her son. And they were members there. So they had tough services today trying to deal with that. But anyway, So one day this week, her service will be, and we will try to make arrangements. It's appropriate that Emmanuel would send flowers. They were charter members of our church here. And Brother George was a deacon. They were here for, I think, nearly 40 years before they moved off. And so they were a real asset to our church. I hated to see them go, to move off. And so anyway, so that will be later on this week. So appreciate all of y'all's help and cooperation in the middle of all of this and your prayers for those families. I know there must be something else I'm forgetting. There's so much else, so many things going on this week. But anyway, Matthew chapter 26, and I'm going to begin reading in verse 17. I'm going to read through verse 23. It says, "Now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying unto him, Where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? And he said, Go into the city to such a man and say unto him, The Master saith, My time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at thy house with my disciples. And the disciples did as Jesus had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. Now when the even was come, he sat down with the 12, and as they did eat, he said, Verily I say unto you, that one of you shall betray me. And they were exceedingly sorrowful, and began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? And he answered and said, He that dippeth his hand with me in the dish, the same shall betray me. And you know that turned out to be Judas. Oh, I knew I was forgetting something before I go on. Brother Ken Sibley is going to be here with us in our evening service. He is at McKinney this morning, and he was lacking an evening appointment, and I found out he was there, and so I said, come over here. We haven't had him now in several years. Brother Ken Sibley, the word magic is not in there, and he's not a magician, but he's a Christian illusionist, and he uses illusion to share the gospel. And he just flew in yesterday from a meeting up around Maryland. I think they had around 20 saved in a vacation Bible school. And so he's going to be up on cloud 9, I'm sure, from that. But he's going to be here tonight. So if y'all can be back tonight, that would be super good, at least for him to have an audience. Somebody, anybody, can you? Or Sunday nights sometimes with situations like this are a little small. So if you can be back tonight, come and support him as he preaches the gospel to us through using these illusions. Anyway, so now I think I got everything I'm supposed to remember in before the service is over with. But anyway, here, and Jesus had met with his disciples, and that's when he had the Passover with them. He also instituted the ordinance of the Lord's Supper at the same time that he had, after he had observed that Passover. And so he announced that during the Passover that one of them would betray him. And those disciples began to ask him in there. He said, they asked the question, is it I? In verse 22. And began every one of them to say unto him, Lord, is it I? He didn't announce at first the name. He indicated, they didn't even pick up on it later, that it was Judas. They thought Judas was going to go out and buy something for the Passover, do something. But they didn't even pick up on it. But they were concentrating on themselves, and they asked the question, is it I? You know, let's skip over to verse 41. Jesus had gone out into the Garden of Gethsemane and had been praying. And he said, watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so because of their known knowledge of the weakness of the flesh, they asked the Lord, Lord, am I the one? Am I the one? Have I done that? Will I be the one to do that? You see, it seems like they had lost confidence in the flesh and their attitude that I'd never do a thing like that. And I know sometimes if I brought this up here, the thing might go through your mind. Well, I wouldn't do a thing like that. Well, we better be careful, hadn't we? We better be very careful. There's not anything that we wouldn't do if it weren't for the grace of God. And so in our own power and our own strength, there's not anything that we could say, well, I wouldn't do that. We better be very careful in saying that we won't do things. Now, I want to consider these men who's asking that question. He met with his 12. We're talking about 12 apostles. We're talking about the best of the best. We're talking about the leaders of that first church. They had left everything and they had followed Jesus. They left their businesses and their trade and they left it alone and they took after following Jesus. We could probably say this is about the 12 most faithful in the world at that time. And they're asking the question, Lord, is it I? Would I do a thing like that? There's no question in their minds to who Jesus was. I mean, they're asking, am I the one? Would I betray you? Because they already knew who Jesus was. John the Baptist had introduced them to Jesus, and he identified Jesus and said, behold the Lamb of God. They were introduced to him as the Lamb of God. They had seen the miracles that he worked, and it manifested and declared he had to be the Son of God. Those Jews came to him and said, well, if you're the Son of God, give us a sign. So well did he give them some signs. More than sufficient. Three of the 12, had been with him up on the Mount of Transfiguration when he was transfigured in his glory in their presence. They knew who he was, that he was the Son of God, but yet they asked, am I the one that would betray you? And after they seen all of that, they acclaimed him to be the Christ. You know, Jesus one time asked those disciples, he said, whom do men say that I am? And they said, well, some of them think you're John the Baptist raising the dead. You might be Elijah the prophet. You might be a prophet raised from the dead. They gave all these explanations. But whom do you say that I am? And Peter, being the spokesman for the group, spoke out very quickly and readily. Thou art the Son of God. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And so they knew who he was. And they're not weaklings, they're not cowards, but they knew how weak the flesh was, and that they began to ask, Lord, am I the one that's going to do a thing like that? Am I the one that's going to betray you? You know, in John chapter 6, Jesus had met with a multitude, and he had fed the multitude with just a few loaves and fishes, and a little bit later that he came back and he began teaching some hard doctrine to them, serious stuff. And it said, and many of his disciples, now these are kind of spurious disciples, not committed disciples, that's a great amount of that multitude. It says, and many of them walked no more with him. And Jesus turned to the 12 and said, are you going to go also? And they said, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of life. Thou hast the words of everlasting life. And so they were committed to him. Now they're asking themselves, will I be the one to betray you? Now he did not imply by this question that they no longer had faith in Jesus. He wasn't trying to imply that they did not love Jesus. He was not trying to suggest those things at all. He was not even suggesting that they had not grown spiritually in his service at all. But it implied that these men were not yet perfect in their obedience to the Lord. They just quite wasn't there. And so we have to be very, very careful. And their love was not yet perfect. It is implied that these men could not be faithful to the Lord in their own strength. Now, write that one down. We cannot be faithful to the Lord in our own strength. It is implied that these men had no confidence in the flesh. And as he told them in verse 41, watch and pray that you enter not into temptation, that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And it is implied that they could not trust their flesh. They did not dare boast at this time that they would remain faithful to Jesus. Listen, when my kids were younger and they were teenagers, all you parents you've all heard this, you know. They want to do something and you're trying to say no, and they come back at you and say, well, don't you trust me? And my answer was no. And I explained, I wouldn't trust myself in the same situation. How would I be able to trust anybody else? The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Listen, you don't know what you'll do when you get out there in some circumstances and some conditions. Until the time comes, you don't know what you would do. You cannot trust your flesh. You cannot trust your flesh. It's terribly unreliable. Now, the practical application of this question, Jesus is not being betrayed to be tried and crucified. Today, that's all finished. That's a done deal. But he is being belittled and cheapened by the world. Lord, is it I that would do a thing like that? I'm going to tell you something that I heard this week that I am terribly disappointed in. And it just shows you sometimes that Christianity is not always on God's side. Now, I have always admired and greatly respected Hobby Lobby. They've been a Christian organization, right? They spent $1 billion in Washington, D.C. to build a museum of the Bible. You've heard about it. Do you know what they just recently did as a fundraiser? They had a musical up there called Godspell. And there's nothing in the world any more blasphemous and worse than that musical. The musical portrayed Jesus and his disciples as a bunch of clowns, and that Jesus was crucified on a chain-link fence. That just makes my blood boil. I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know what the idea behind all that was. I don't know if they were thinking that somewhere, somebody, some group of people, some category of people was going to get the message or not. But to portray my Jesus and these apostles as a bunch of clowns is highly offensive to me. I don't know if I'll ever get the chance to tell them, but I may tell them with it. But that's even Christianity. We don't know what we will do in the right circumstances. Maybe for a few dollars they would do that. But I'm terribly disappointed in them that they would do that. You know, there's a great lack of heartfelt Christianity and spirituality in God's churches. You know, I remember days, these days are gone. I realize that they're gone. Things are different now. But there were days when an invitation would be given in a revival and the altar would be filled with people praying about their loved ones and lost souls and souls that needed to come back. And that type of spirituality is gone. And Lord, am I one of them that lacks that spirituality? Sincere prayer and communion with God is neglected. Lord, am I guilty? Sincere prayer, am I guilty? Real genuine Bible study is neglected. You know, there used to be what we call hellfire and brimstone preaching. Preachers just told it like it was. And nowadays, if you do that in churches, they'll scatter. They'll be gone, won't they? They don't want to hear it. You know, admittingly, none of us would claim to be perfect in faith and love, and that ourselves, within our own ability, within our own flesh, we got to acknowledge how weak that we are and what our flesh will do if we don't keep it under check. You know, when we serve God faithfully, it is because God's working in us. Now, I want to tell you how great God is. All right? I want to tell you how great God is. Paul's made the statement in 1 Corinthians 15:10. He said, by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace which was bestowed upon me was not in vain, but I labored more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God which was in me. Okay? So anything we do that's good and right, we do it by the grace of God. Right? That God works in us. Now here's how great God is. I can't do anything of myself for God. I have to have God working in me to do anything great for God. So he does all the work. All I'm doing is letting him use me to do the work. Now he's doing the work, he's just using me. All I'm doing is letting him use me. You know, it's kind of like a carpenter builds a house. And when that house is all finished, and you talk about the looks of that house, you don't brag on the hammer. You brag on the carpenter, right? God gets the credit. God did it. I can't do it without him. He has to do it. He has to do it through me. And he's going to reward me. Why doesn't he get the trophy? He did it. He's the one that accomplished it. And all he did all I did was just let him. I just let him. And yet he did it. But he's going to reward me for the work that was done. Now that's pretty good God, isn't it? I tell you what, when you really think about it, I'm saved by the grace of God. I didn't do a thing. He's the one who took his blood before the Father and paid the price. I didn't do anything. I didn't deserve it. There's not a single thing. And you know what? Y'all know what I mean in Texas when I tell you, you're not worth a plug nickel when it comes to salvation. We didn't do anything. Y'all know what a plug nickel is? You know those metal electrical boxes that have the little knockout in them? When they come out with soda machines, people would use those for a quarter. And that's a plug nickel, okay? That's what I call the plug nickel. Now they got smart and figured out we're not going to let them work anymore. And so it won't work anymore in the soda machine. But anyway, we didn't do anything. God did it all. And then if we do anything, we do it by the grace of God. He does it. And then he rewards us. He saved us and gave us eternal life based on what he did. And then he rewards us based on what he did. That's pretty good God to do a thing like that, isn't it? We can't trust our flesh, folk. That's the whole lesson here. We don't know what we would do in the right circumstances and maybe the wrong circumstances, but we cannot trust ourselves. God does all the work and he gives us a reward for it. And we must rejoice in Jesus Christ and have no confidence in the flesh. Psalm 30 and verse 6 says, and in my prosperity I said, I shall never be moved. Lord, by thy favor thou hast made my mountain to stand strong. Thou didst hide thy face, and I was troubled. So we need to stand on the Lord with the Lord's help and the Lord's strength to do what we do, and be absolutely certain that we cannot trust ourselves. I can't trust me. How can we trust anybody? We can't trust ourselves. And so sometimes it is imperative that we do a little soul searching. And that's exactly what those disciples were doing. Lord, Is it me? You know, sometimes Jesus talked about going into your closet and praying, and that word closet really means your bedroom. It just means a private area. It could be anywhere. There's some things that you say in a prayer when you pray in church. But there are some things you don't say out loud in church. Right? There's some things you just don't talk about in public, in church. And so your prayers in church and your prayers at the restaurant and then your prayers in the closet are different. And sometimes we need to stop and just do a little soul searching. What does God think about me? It doesn't matter what I think about God. It's what does God think about me? How does God see me? Now, I will raise my opinion of myself. It'll be higher at almost any time than God puts it. That's our nature. But sometimes we need to just stop, humble our hearts, and say, What do you think about me, God? What's your opinion of me? We do a little soul searching. Sometimes in our relationships to each other, we do a little soul searching. Lord, am I the problem? Am I the one that's the problem here? Do a little soul searching. And I'll tell you what, any Christian that does that kind of soul searching, be a good spouse, be a good friend, be a good working person. Sometimes we just have to ask ourselves, am I the problem here? Do a little soul searching and start asking ourselves, because at some time or the other, you can answer that question, yes, I'm the problem. I'm the problem here. So we can't trust ourselves. What if I were God and I were looking down out of heaven on me, what would I be thinking? So we have to search our hearts. What does God think of us? Now, in conclusion, I'll just ask this question. Does Jesus allow these spiritual depressions to come upon us because we get too boastful about our relationship to Him and we begin to think more highly of ourselves than we ought to think? We need to always be on guard and always in privacy asking the Lord, Lord, is it I? Am I the one? Is it I? What's your relationship with the Lord right now? What is it that He would like for you to do?